Hello, welcome, I'm Mr. J, and we're getting back into the second part of this, which is on how to render your Minecraft build in Blender. This is cycles, and let's sort of get started. So how to move, you basically just use the middle mouse button to scroll around, and shift middle mouse to move, side to side, up and down. Really useful. Now to sort of move like a character in a video game, you can press shift and tilde, which is right next to the 1 and below the escape button. And that allows you to move around, and if you scroll, it allows you can go faster or slower depending on how you scroll. Then you can also scroll in and out. Now to delete everything in the scene, which we will be doing, we can just select everything and press X and then delete, or you can press the delete button, or you could right click and press delete. Now we're going to be importing the build into Blender using wavefront.obj, top left hand corner, and then import, Hopefully you saw that. Actually, let me go back. So I'll show you that again. File, import wavefront.obj, and mine's right here. Miss small, and it's going to take a little bit to load in. Once we do that, I'm going to be showing you some stuff about how to actually save the project real quick, because saving the project frequently is a good idea, just in case if it crashes. Blender does not crash often, but it can crash, and when it does, you definitely want to make sure you have a backup save. So save pretty well often, just in case. Mine's pretty large. Most of your stuff won't be 108 megabytes. It really depends though. It's a fair sized one, not the biggest one I've ever done though. Now we need to scale this down. So to scale it, we can press S and move our mouse inward to scale it down to be a smaller size. I want to scale it down to be pretty small, actually. I like it about here. And at this point, let me show you how to save. So you can press Control S, just like any other program, and you can name it whatever you want. I'm just going to be naming it Miss Small. And you can also do it like 1 as well. But whenever you press this, it will actually increase it +1. Increase whatever number's in there plus 1 more, or subtract 1. So this is extremely handy because whenever you put the project in, and you want to know what version you're on, which version of the project you're on, you can save it on different names. Very, very, very useful, especially if you want to have different versions that you can go back to as well. Now that's really handy. Now let's say if we have 2 objects in here, and you don't need to use a cube. I'm just using this as an example. You can actually select the cube, and you can press on the number pad the del button, or the dot. It's right next to 0, and enter, and it allows you to zoom in on that object and look at that specific one. You can also do that with this one as well. Allows you to see that specific one. Very, very useful. It's allowing you see the object and selecting between which one you want to use, like if you're looking at the camera or the light or whatever. Now let's get an HDR in here. Go top right hand corner, scroll this down, you can then go to the top left hand corner and go to shader editor, and we will go back up to the top left hand corner and go to world. And in here, first off, you're gonna need to, well, what I'm about to do you can't exactly do, because I do have several add-ons in that I've downloaded for Blender, and actually some of you have already downloaded it, because with Blender it comes with many add-ons with it, like all these it comes with. And one of them that is extremely useful is called Node Wrangler. Type in node and turn on Node Wrangler. I also have node animation nodes turned on as well, however that's not going to affect you whatsoever. Just turn on Node Wrangler, and that will allow you to do this little shortcut here, which is Control T, which allows you to, it just puts these in here for you, which saves you a lot of time and a lot of energy, especially if you don't know how to do it in the first place. But if you do actually want to put the stuff in, I'll be showing you some of that material kind of stuff in a minute when we're changing material. And HDR is a high dynamic range image, HDR is a high dynamic range. That's what that stands for. And HDRI is high dynamic range image, which is basically what an HDR is, and it uses multiple exposed images to create one image. So it's just really useful. It's really useful because it gives it a lot more accurate look to it. And you can use that to tell exactly how much light something has. So you can make the sun the brightest object, because in some images, if you look at like a light bulb, like if there's a light bulb here, this light bulb will be equally as bright as, let's say, the sun. Even though we know they're not equally as bright, the image might think they are. So with an HDR, it actually gets it a lot more realistic, so that the sun's the brightest thing, and this lamp over here is not very bright. Very, very useful. Let me go into my HDR folder. You can find HDRs or HDRIs online. For example, HDR Haven, and it's just really, really nice. So let me explain a few things about Evey and cycles now that I got that out of the way. So Evey does not look very good. However, if you know what you're doing, you actually can make Evey look a whole lot better, and there's going to be a video on that subject, so don't worry about that. Now, let me sort of show you what it is. Evey uses a lot of shortcuts to be able to do certain things. Now, you don't have to follow along with what I'm doing right now, because I'm just going to be showing something off that Evey can do quite well. However, it can't exactly do other things very well. So, basically, it's able to make pretty doggone realistic metals fairly easily. As you can see here, the metal looks pretty good. I mean, it's not the most realistic metal, however, it definitely does reflections pretty well. Now, obviously, it's not going to be like perfect reflections, but it definitely does very well. Especially since this is basically a game render engine. That's what the positive of this is, that it's a game render engine. That's one of the best things about this, which is very, very nice. And this is really cool, actually. A black metal, that's really neat. Anyways, let me get back to what I was doing. So, as you can see, the Evey render engine does look pretty nice. However, there are some issues. As you can see, there's no bounce lighting. So this has no reflections of this here. You can actually get it to do that. However, you have to use light probes, which will be explained later. Which, as I just shown, Evey's pretty good at using materials and the basic lighting in order to make a pretty doggone realistic look. The only problem is Minecraft's materials are not very good, so Evey doesn't necessarily work that well for Minecraft stuff. I mean, you can make it work pretty well, you just have to work at it a little bit harder. But it is a live render engine, which is really nice for doing an animation, so that's where I'd recommend doing it. Now, if we go back to cycles, I forgot to actually turn that off so it takes less time to start rendering in. You can already see it's a lot more realistic, and there's even bounce lighting. This right here is quite a bit more. It's quite a bit more orange right here. That's because this light is bouncing off of this and hitting this, which is very, very important because that gives a much more realistic result in the end. So if let's change this to GPU compute. GPU compute actually uses CPU and GPU, which is actually pretty important. So now let's actually get some light emission in here because I do want this to be light emitting, the glass in here. So let's go to top right hand corner and open this up both times, and we'll be going down to stained glass. You can also search it up in here if you cannot find it. And here it is, stained glass. And I'm going to be deleting this area here. And you can just press delete, or you can just press X to delete that. Now with this, press shift. Well, actually I won't delete this as well. I don't need that either. Which is going to take a little bit of time to update because of the fact that I have that rendering in. But shift A and go to shader and emission shader. Then you can import this into there, and I'd recommend making it pretty well blue because, you know, it's lightning. Well, it depends on what you're doing. It depends on what you're doing. Now, if you're doing a lamp like a jack-o'-lantern, definitely make it orange. But if you're not doing that, make sure it's just make sure it's the correct light that you want. You can use this to do whatever light that you want to use, which is really nice. And you can combine this with the texture. I just find that generally it looks better if you don't do that, unless it's a lantern, which I'll probably explain later. I don't have lanterns in this, so I can't explain it right now. So that's unfortunate, but I'll explain it at a later date. So let me continue on with what I was doing. So after this, we have camera, focus, and cameras in general, really. If we go into this scene, press Shift A, then we can actually put a camera into the scene and move it up. And if we press 0, it lets us go into camera view. However, if we try moving it, it doesn't do anything. Well, you have to press N this opens up this menu over here, and we need to lock camera to view. So then once we have this, we can press the shift tilde thing and we can move it around like a person, which is really handy. Be able to do, and we'll move it around. I like this area-ish. I want to move it around a little bit. Possibly here. I don't know, I sort of like this area. I'm not very picky right now because I just don't care currently, because it's not like a full render I'm going to be doing, because this is for the tutorial. However, one thing I do need to stress is that you can actually rotate it here. You can rotate the HDR so that if there is some stuff in the background, you can rotate it out of view and still have the lighting looking really nice. So that's pretty important. I thought I might need to mention that. There's also scale, but scale is not very important at all, and I've never used it. And location, not very important either, unless you're doing something very specific, which I'll be explaining in the future in a different tutorial. So, which is, I'll have to show you that later. I'll have to show you that, but it's really nice. Let's see what's next. So render speed and the boxes and stuff like that, I'm going to be explaining next. I like this. Well, actually, no, wait, I need to explain the focus. So with the focus, if you press 0, it gets you out of the camera. But if you do Shift A, you can go to empty, empty cube. And what you can use this empty to do is actually select where, well, the distance that you want your focus to be away from your camera, because you actually can select your distance from your camera. Just generally, it works better to do. It works better if you just use an empty. It ends up a lot more clean because you don't have to guess at the distance or figure out the distance. And if we go to camera, which should be somewhere. I mean, we're in a camera right now. Oh yeah, I need to undo this search right here. This collection. Here we go. Select the camera. Go into here, and let's see. We can turn on depth of field down at the bottom, and we can select this using the eyedropper. Select object empty, and the f-stops determines how the blur is going to be. I generally keep it at pretty low. However, don't go all the way to the bottom, because it's really easy to accidentally make what you want to be in focus out of focus on accident. So generally, keep it fairly high, because I mean, you do want things to be a little bit out of focus, but you don't want it to be massively out of focus. You know, you want this to be in focus, you want this to be sort of in focus, and this to be completely in focus. You don't want, you know, everything to be out of focus like this. This is way too far. So definitely keep it up a little bit higher than what you think it should be, and then possibly move this back just a little bit as well, which I think helps it out a little bit. Not a whole lot, but it does help it out a little bit in my opinion. And let's continue on. I had a little tongue-tied issue there for a second. Now let me explain all these settings on the side. So this right here is, I'm not entirely sure what this is. It's like workspace and like filter the add-ons and custom property. Yeah, I've never used this. I'm pretty sure this is basically this over here. Yeah, basically this is the settings for the toolbox. Oh, okay, that makes sense. This is the toolbox settings. Active tool and workspace settings. Yeah, that's what this is for, and some of the workspace settings. Also, I forgot to mention that this over here is where you can select what kind of viewport you have. So this is the texture viewport, this is the solid viewport, and this is the wireframe viewport. And you have settings for each one. You could use a matte cap, or you could make it flat, or you could have, you can do a lot of cool stuff. There's also random and texture. There's a lot of different settings with this, so it's pretty interesting. Yeah, just keep that in mind. For the most part, you're going to be using the that one and this one over here. So sorry if I didn't mention that previously and you're confused. I'm in a bit of a hurry because this video takes a long time to make, and I don't have a lot of time to make it, so it's pretty difficult. Let's continue on. So in this setting over here, this area, this box, which is the render box, as you can read there, we have the render engine cycles enabled, and generally you don't go into experimental unless you're doing like a tutorial, because there are some settings that are in experimental that are not in the supported. But yeah, CPU and GPU is important, and I'll explain that later. But generally you keep it on GPU if you can, because for the most part GPU will be faster because it's graphics processing unit, which is what GPUs are for, and this is graphics processing, so you know, have the tool for the job kind of deal. The sampling is one of the most important settings in here because this is the way you can decrease or increase your render times drastically. Because right now we're using 32 samples, and this is what it looks like with 32 samples. It's really blurry, but let's say if you do it at 64, you can give it a little bit more time, which it doesn't do it instantly. However, you can give it some more time and it will smooth itself out over time. However, you need a lot of samples in order to do something really nice. So generally, like, let me show you what one sample is actually. So one sample, move. There we go. So this is one sample. So basically each time you increase the sample, it does one more sample. What's so important about this is that each sample fills in an area and fills in more and more information. So after a while, once you just keep adding more and more information, for example, 64, it's still loading currently, but it filled in a lot more information than what it was at first, for sure. And then you could also times that by 2, and you can keep increasing the information until you get a full view, so you can see everything in the picture. So this is actually pretty important, truthfully, because right now this is about 128. This is I don't think this is done rendering currently, but let's say generally you don't use 128 because that's way too low. I mean, it's fairly decent, but for the most part, I would say 512 you can get by with just doing it at 512. Many people do their renders at 512 and just denoise them afterwards, and they look pretty good. I prefer to go generally 1 to 2 steps ahead. It really depends on what I'm doing. So I generally do 1024 or 2048. Generally 2048, there's not a big difference between 2048 and 1024. And 512, you can get by with using 512 for sure. So if you want to do your render a little bit quicker, do 512. That's what I would recommend. And then if you want to do a high quality render, just do 1024 or 2048. Those 2048 is a pretty decent amount. I would say it's pretty good quality render, pretty good sample amount. Now in light paths, what this means is that it's the amount that light will bounce. So for example, there's light bounce over here. So light will hit this, then bounce off and hit this. And generally, you don't really need very many because it doesn't really matter most of the time. Like here's 0. So this is 0. There's a big difference right there. However, here's 1, right? So this is 1. Now, there's almost no difference between 1 and like 12, right? You probably can't even tell the difference between this one and this one here. Maybe just ever so slightly, but at 2, the difference between 2 and 12 is even less. Though, since it's like going out for a second, you can't exactly see what's going on very much, but yeah, generally you don't need more than 1. So I would just recommend keeping it at 1, since that's generally what works. 1 is probably one of the that's not funny at all. Using just one sample works great, and it gives you a pretty good result that's realistic, and you generally don't need more. You cannot really tell the difference. If you're worried about it, use 2. That's what I would say. And if you do have glass in the render, then I would say you probably need to use you probably just need to use more samples, especially for the glass. But you can select glass, so you can filter out transparency, and you could use more. You can use more samples on You can use more light bounces on transparency, which I would recommend doing if you do have glass in your stuff, or if you have water. But then there's also reflective and refractive caustics, which is not very important for most renders unless you're using something with glass. So in most cases, just turn that off. That will save you some time. Volumes, let's see, nope, no, that's important. Now this is important here. This is where I'm getting into GPU part of it. The threads is basically just auto detect, that you won't need to change that. Tiles is important because, for example, if I press render here and we check this out, as you can see, whenever I render this, Here we go. This is basically the size of one tile here. This is a 64 by 64 tile. Now, if I do this at like, yeah, maybe not that big, 256, no, 128, this will be twice the size of 64. If I do it this much, you'll be able to tell the difference quite drastically. So 512 by 512, not 512, 126, yeah, there we go, 128 by 128. You can already tell the difference. Now, the thing is that it really depends on what you're using, because if you use a CPU and you render it this way, you want this to be smaller, so like 16 possibly, or 8 on the size of these tiles would be better, because generally your computer likes, generally CPUs like you doing small little bits of information really quickly. So as you can see here, it's doing a pretty quick job of it. Right, it already has a pretty fair amount done. However, if I actually change this to be like 512, and I change it to CPU, if I put this as like 512, the computer would hate me if I did this, because it doesn't like doing this, because it's not made to do that. Now, let's see. Now, whenever you turn something on, yeah, see, it's going to take forever if I do this. See, remaining time 3 hours or something like that. See it? Actually, no, it's not 3 hours. It says 2 minutes. But yeah, anyways, it's going to take a very, very, very long time. However, if I change it to GPU, that's going to be a lot quicker. Now, obviously, the time wasn't exactly correct. But anyways, for GPUs, GPUs like bigger amounts of information at one time, so it's better to have a larger area. However, the problem with that is that now they have a GPU and CPU rendering. So if you're using your GPU, obviously you want to make sure it's bigger. However, it might be better to actually have some parts of it smaller, because all of this might be, I'm not sure if this is all CPU or all GPU. It's really confusing. It's very, very confusing on how it's actually working. So I'm not sure how big the tile size should be. You're gonna have to test out for yourself. And there's a video done by Blender Guru that sort of explains some of that, and I will have a link in the description to that video. There's also a progressive refine, so basically it just keeps doing it. It keeps rendering it over and over again until you stop it. Wait. Okay, never mind. Sorry. That's a different one. But progressive refine basically means that it's doing the entire image at once rather than square by square, which I don't think is necessarily faster. It really depends. But there's nothing else in this section that you need to be worried about. You're just going to have to learn how to use those tiles. I'm not entirely sure myself. It also depends on what kind of thing you're using. And then there's also Filmic here, which is pretty fairly decently important. Filmic is a different kind of view used when converting image to display space. So Filmic is a way of converting the image into the stuff over there. If you have it in standard, it's going to be it's not going to be as good of quality, because Filmic actually records it more like real life. And this is one reason why movies are more realistic now with CGs, because of ACES, which I believe Filmic is using ACES. I'm not sure, but either way, I like also using the medium high contrast as the look, or the high contrast. I like using medium high contrast. And you also change the exposure, and also realistically changes the exposure. So basically, when you turn it all the way down, this will still be there. However, in some, yeah, it just makes it more realistic, okay? On how light works, because this is actually how a lamp works. If you try doing that, and let's see, what does it do with standard? Well, standard is still Filmic, I think, but that's fine. Either way, this is more realistic. Just trust me. Use Filmic. Now it's actually already downloaded into Blender. Used to, you actually had to download a add-on for it, but that's fine. It's very, very nice. It should feel very appreciated because they added that in. It's very, very nice. And I believe we are almost good. Some post-processing. So I want to do a very quick render and show you some post-processing. So I'm actually going to change this to 50%. Nah, actually, I want to leave this at 100%. It's fine. And I'm going to change this and do some sampling stuff. Change this to 128 real quick. Do very simple little thing. 256. Actually, no. I want to try it out at 128. See if that's any faster. Of course, I won't know because it really depends on each render that you do. So it's very it really depends. I'm gonna have to try it out later. I believe this is faster. Because see, this will render, right? This is CPU rendering, so this takes more time. See, this is GPU rendering, which takes less time. So yeah, it's a little bit confusing because I'm not entirely sure what's faster. I believe this was a lot faster because of how the GPU works. I might need to increase it just a little bit. I think that's about right. Yeah, that was really fast. That was just 31 seconds. Let me go into here. Now I'm going to be closing this little window. You can close windows by, yeah, here we go. Selecting this top corner, go up, then down, and it shuts that bottom window. Let's go into the compositor, which is just up here, compositor. And if you want to change this around, it's really easy. So you can use it just like how you used the texture editor. So you can go into here, Shift A, filter, and you can do a glare, and that's what I'm going to be using. And I'm also going to be doing a filter, well, not filter, let me find it real quick. A distort flip. I want to try this out real quick. See if that looks better. No, I don't necessarily like that more. It looks a little bit weird. It's actually good to flip stuff because it allows you to see whether or not it looks good both ways, which is important. Either way, this is streaks and just has some streaks. There's also simple star, basically same thing as streak, just a little bit different. There's also ghosts, which basically takes your light and like distorts it. It's really weird. I don't necessarily like it very much, so I'm not really going to use it. I mean, I do like it. It would look cool in some things, just no. Fog glow, let's see. Is there any way I can... Oh, geez, no. Yeah, let's go. -8? No, okay. Down. I want to leave the size around 8, maybe 9. Oh, that's a bit too much. Threshold 1. I like how this is looking currently. I think this is good. I'm going to leave it at this. But you can change the settings as much as you want. I like the glare. Unless if anything else I want to use, I hardly ever use this truthfully, so it's really difficult for what I want to use. This is also something that's really cool, is that you can use a color ramp and change this to black and white, and change how much of it's white and how much of it's black. So this would basically be how it would normally be, but then you can up the contrast, which is sort of interesting if you think about it, because then you could definitely have some interesting effects using that. But you can also do that sort of similar kind of deal by using a color, like a hue correct and stuff like that, and change the hue of it. You could really add some punch to it, I think. Was it this one? Yeah. You can change the color of certain things to be a bit more on certain sides, which is really cool. Wow, this is really neat. I've never used this thing before. You make things more blue or less blue. That's cool right there. That's just cool. It's just neat right there. I want to do this some more. That's cool. Anyways, sorry, I got a little distracted there. You also change like color balance and stuff. Like you can edit the image using this, like how you'd use Krita. I would recommend using this over Krita if you're going to do some color balancing and if you're going to do some color editing, because you have in my opinion, you have more flexibility over the image using whenever you're using this program. In my opinion, at least, I think you have more control over what's happening. So that's one reason why I would yeah, because Krita, you can do a lot of custom stuff, like you can do a lot of custom specific stuff. However, you can't necessarily do certain things. Like you can do this in Krita, it's just not as easy is what I just did in this program. Like, I just did this by playing around with it and trying to come up with an interesting effect. So with this, you can really just play around with what you're doing, and it's just so easy. Like, here we go. Let's do this. Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting here. But yeah, like, using Blender to do some of the editing is a very good idea, and I will definitely do a video on this specifically. The main things you're going to be using, though, is most likely the color and the filter. Especially color, because this allows you to do like hue, saturation, value, and, you know, like invert and stuff like that. Well, no one uses invert, but that's fine. Or color correction, and allows you to change all this to be more saturated or whatever. Oh my goodness, this is beautiful. I'll make everything super saturated. Oh that is so cool. That is so cool. I want to keep that. I want to keep this. This is beautiful. That's beautiful right there. Especially want the highlights to be. I want the highlights to be super saturated. Contrast. Oh gee, oh, don't do that. Don't, oh man, definitely don't do that. There we go. A little too far there. Either way, this is really nice. Sorry I'm sort of fiddling with this, but you can definitely do some really cool effects with this for sure, which allows you to do some cool things and to change it and to be able to do what you want with it. And Krita can do that as well, but it's a lot more custom, so you can select exactly where you want to highlight. While in here you can't necessarily do that as easily. It's still just so powerful because it allows you to change almost anything in the image, but it's more procedural rather than how in Krita you can do things a lot more custom, if you know what I mean. So this is pretty much done. I'm gonna play around with this a little bit more. I really like this pop art kind of feel with this. It's so neat. It's so contrasty. I might need to probably turn down the saturation on certain things, especially the midtones. Maybe turn down the midtones and like, oh, okay, that's what that is. That's so cool. This is neat. Maybe if I turn it all down. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Anyways, hope you have a great, wonderful day. Oh, yeah, sublime, majestic, sublime, yeah, but all the amazing words. Have a great, wonderful day, and God bless.